Keto Fest in 2017 was the catalyst of so much different stuff, because I met Amber O'Hearn for the first time, and I eventually moved in with her and lived with her for a few years. We still live in the same town. And I met Dave for the first time, and Dave was he is such an interesting person. Like, he's so welcoming and cheerful and kind. And to me, that was just like, huh? It's so weird to me, of like, how can you be like, he was this Tigger of a person. And so partly for that, but then partly, like, at the time I worked in IT, and even as a child, I would grow up with these conversations with my dad, who's also in IT. And me and Dad would talk about like object-oriented programming and like all of this different stuff. And Dave was talking about that same stuff as well, but in terms of cholesterol metabolism. And cholesterol is not really anything I had thought of much. Like, I knew I had gotten into a tiff with a prior doctor because my cholesterol was super high before keto, and there was all this stuff. So that was about the only interaction I had ever had with cholesterol up to that point. My dad had early heart disease, so obviously we talked about it in that context too. But Dave was talking about it in a way that was really interesting to me, because he was using word and language that I understood from this like technical perspective. So the combination of his really strange to me, genuine personality, plus what he was talking about was really interesting, meant like every time there was an open seat next to him, I'd be sitting down. And my tactic, for one, I was genuinely interested in it, but for two, I knew if I ask him questions about cholesterol, he'll talk a lot, which made the whole interaction easier. So I would ask like, okay, so you mentioned blah, blah, blah about HDL, and I'd just start asking questions. And on the way back from Keto Fest, I had gotten his cell phone number and asked if I could text him, and he said sure. So I was already asking him, like, what's the best entry point to learning about cholesterol? And eventually I ended up reading through a couple different textbooks that were kind of sideways recommended through the resource that he had suggested. And from there, we just started talking and working together. And I wanted to help him because I could tell, even at that point, that he was really busy. And like now, he's even busier. But like the obsessive part of me has always been a strange aspect of myself that I've had to deal with, because I would be introduced to topics and by other people, and then I would get like way more into them than the other person. And eventually I'd reach a point where I was talking about it like tea cultivars or something, and the person would just have like this blank expression, and I've completely lost them. And it's like, okay, whatever. And then it wasn't as fun anymore. But the one time, I mean, it's happened now with lipedema stuff as well, but the first time that ever happened where it went differently for me was with Dave, because I would send him these huge walls of text over Slack, and just talking about like the papers I had been reading and my thoughts on them, and asking him questions like, do you think it works like this way, blah, blah, blah. And for the first time in my life, someone responded just as excited and enthusiastic and interested as I was. And I was like, that's it. Like, this is it for me. This is what I'm doing. And like, man, we've been working together full time since 2018. So what is that, 6 years now? And it's just been so fun. And if you want to talk about like civil, polite debates and discussions, Dave and I have gotten into plenty of them, and it's so fun and it's so great. And I feel like that initial aspect of looking into cholesterol metabolism and eventually the immune system and inflammation and insulin resistance and how all of those interconnect, which is a whole like super fascinating thing just in itself, really set me up really well for the lipedema diagnosis. And the lipedema diagnosis was a bit of a slow hitter. So I had lost a bunch of weight on a ketogenic diet. I had a normal waist size, I still do. But but there was like this odd aspect to it where even with my first picture with Dave, where I still had a little bit more weight to lose, he had like put his arm around me for the picture, and I remember feeling so self-conscious because I was aware that my arms were just big, like they looked big. And like there's the sequence of pictures where I'm clearly like trying to pull away, like, nah, I don't know about it. And then he pulls me back in, and it's great. But like I was aware on some level of the disproportion. I just thought it was how I was naturally shaped. But fast forward to I think 2019, and I had done this super long fasting experiment, 2 weeks of water fasting, and then fat fasting on top of that, where I was only consuming pure fat. And it was a self-experiment, which I had done a ton of before, and I had done long fasts before that when I was at a higher weight. And my logic through this is visually, I clearly have a lot of fat, so I should be able to comfortably fast for this long. But it went weird. Even by the end of the first week, I was already talking to Dave, and I was like, I don't know if I want to continue this. Like, I just keep thinking about food. And on previous fasts, wouldn't think about food at all. The main problem was that it was boring. And this was different. I was starting to get fatigued. I was starting to sleep a lot, but it was very disrupted. I'd have trouble sleeping at night, but then I'd have to take a nap during the day because I was so exhausted. My menstrual cycle got disrupted during that. I was feeling cold, and just the obsessive thoughts about food. And it was weird, but what ultimately happened is I had posted a before picture before the fast and then a during picture, and 3 different women reached out to me privately and said something along the lines of, have you ever looked into lipedema? Because the pictures you've posted, it looks like it might be that. It's like, I don't know what lipedema is. I've never heard of it, so I don't know. And for me, like, I wasn't offended or anything. It's just like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know what that means. So I ended up looking further into it, and I talked to my doctor about it. And at the time, he was like, well, I don't know how much a diagnosis would help. There's not really much you can do about it. Like, I don't want to hear it. Just like, I need to know. I need to know for sure if this is what I'm dealing with. And so he referred me to a specialist. I took a big, awesome road trip with a couple of friends from Colorado to California. Beautiful, gorgeous scenery. Like, just the trip itself was really cool. And I got the diagnosis, and it's like, okay. And it actually took a while for it to set in, because at that point, it's just like, even when it was suggested to me, I was in research mode. And I was like, okay, like, what is this? What are all the papers published about it? What am I walking into, basically? And even at the diagnosis appointment, I was talking to the doctor, and I was like, okay, so like, there's this and blah, blah, blah. And do you think it works like this? Do you think this is happening? And what's funny is she has papers published on lipedema. And so I walked into the appointment. I was like, read all your papers, love your work. She's like, great. But it actually took a while for it to sink in. Like, after the diagnosis, I reached out to, I think it was an accumulation of multiple things. So Amber O'Hearn connected me with Leslyn Keith and Catherine Seo through the Lipedema Project. And I also reached out to them independently because they had written a paper talking about ketogenic diets for lipedema. And I was like, cool, already doing that. But I had some questions about some things that I recommended because I thought they were smart, in terms of like avoiding dairy and avoiding nut flours. And I had already seen in the keto and weight loss community that those could be problematic. So it's like, oh, that's interesting. And so I reached out to them, connected with them. And that's a whole like explosion of things in itself. But it was probably about a year later where it really sunk in, like, oh, I have lipedema and this actually sucks really bad. Like, at that point, I got pretty comfortable with knowing what it is and knowing what we know and some of what we don't know. And I learned a lot more about what we don't know over time. But there is a very emotional and psychological aspect to it, because before the lipedema diagnosis, I had done another experiment, 2 experiments back to back, actually. I had done a high fat carnivore experiment where I achieved my lowest weight ever. I looked so small, like not normal necessarily, like I still looked disproportionate and stuff like that, but definitely smallest waist size I'd ever had. And then immediately after that, I did a high carb experiment. So in between, I had a washout where I ate high protein carnivore to regain the weight I had lost from high fat carnivore. And then I went into this high carb experiment, and I had put it together in a way that I thought would be more careful, because I was trying to replicate an experiment that Dave had done where he had done white bread and lean meat, like deli meat. And I was like, I'm not doing that. Like, I have to be considerate of my mental health. And so I did mine with black beans and chicken breast and some spices in terms of like cumin and garlic powder. And for the last, I think, 5 days, I added in honey and bananas. So like these like wholesome foods, like trying to construct the best version of this that I could. And it still sucked. Like over that experiment, which was 8 days long, plus in the weeks after, I gained a lot of weight. I think I gained like 20 pounds overall if you compare from the end of the high fat carnivore up until the final like measurement of the high carb experiment. And I detail it that way because the psychological impact of going to my smallest size ever to 20 pounds higher in the space of a few weeks was really not fantastic.